This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated almost without knowing it when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
More rewards, more savings. With American Express Business Gold, earn up to $395 back in annual statement credits on eligible purchases at select shipping, food delivery, and retail subscription merchants, including the $155 Walmart Plus monthly membership credit and $240 flexible business credit. Enjoy the benefits of membership with the Amex Business Gold Card. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by Nerds Gummy Clusters, the sweet treat that always elevates the vibe. With a sweet gummy surrounded with tangy, crunchy nerds, every bite of Nerds Gummy Clusters brings you a whole new world of flavor. Whether it's game night, on the way to a concert, or kicking back with your crew, unleash your senses with Nerds Gummy Clusters.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Ferrari launched its 2025 car at Fiorano today with both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton trying the new SF-25. But is it a championship winner, and how has the 7 times world champion settled in at his new team? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to answer perhaps the biggest questions of pre-season are first Jon Noble and then Gary Anderson. Well, John, another launch. We've just been hearing from pretty much everybody at Ferrari over the course of the day. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton's the big attraction, isn't he? Now, he talked about being reinvigorated last night at the O2 launch. And I don't know about you, but the session he's just done with us, he did seem reinvigorated, didn't he? He seemed really excited, energised. He almost felt 10 years younger than he seemed at the end of last season when the weight of the world was on his shoulders.
Yeah, I think you can often tell when Lewis speaks in terms of he wears his heart on his sleeve. If he's downbeat, the answers are very short. There are no anecdotes. There's little enthusiasm, engagement. All that sort of thing. It can be really difficult to extract information out of him. But today I think we had, 25 minutes, I think, with a little media call with Italian journalists, French journalists, international journalists, English journalists. And he was great. Lots of anecdotes about his favourite.
I felt he could have gone on for another half an hour, but for the fact that they stopped and he said he only had 2 hours sleep or something after the launch. But
yeah, he was great. I mean, he talked about his favourite, recounted stories of karting in Italy when he was growing up, recounted stories of his, favourite lasagna from a kart mechanic's wife's mother. There's an enthusiasm and a belief, I think, that he's turned up at Ferrari and it was a new environment. It could have been really difficult for him, out of his comfort zone. And I think it's lit a spark in him. There's a level of enthusiasm. And I think he's seen a team that has all the ingredients it needs to win. Now, it's not necessarily going to say they are going to win because it's a close championship. You can start with the strongest car, but you make an upgrade misstep like Ferrari last year in Spain, you can lose 3-4 races and that can make the difference in the championship. So Lewis isn't saying tonight, we are going to win the championship. He's not saying tonight, I am going to fight for the championship. But what he is saying, I think the message coming out, is that Ferrari has everything it needs to fight for the championship this year. He has everything he needs to be able to fight for the championship this year. It's a question of kind of twiddling the right knobs and making sure all the elements are ticking in exactly the right way. But the platform is there, that Lewis isn't going to this season thinking, oh, I'm just going to cash in my pension and I'm looking for a way out of Formula One. He's looking for a championship. He says he feels like winning this title to him wouldn't feel like an 8th championship. It would feel like the first one because this is a important one for Ferrari. It's almost like Lewis is starting in Formula One all over again.
Yeah, it'll be easy for a cynic to listen to this and say, oh, of course he's saying this is launch season. But I think there's really, really something there. I don't think he knew exactly what was going to happen when he moved into Ferrari. He said he went in with an open mind. He'll have had some preconceptions. But I think probably there'll have been a point where he's breathed a bit of a sigh of relief and said, yeah, there's nothing fundamentally wrong here. And actually, do you know what? I'm enjoying this. I'm willing to put those extra hours in, that extra work, because it's somewhere different, a different environment as well. So, yeah, that's really, really encouraging, I think, for him. And it was interesting as well. He said he doesn't feel he has to change his driving style too much, even though he talked about how different the car feels generally. He said when he moved from McLaren to Mercedes, it was all much the same, commonality of engine, etc. But the Ferrari felt like a whole new environment when he first drove. That'll be referring, I imagine, to the 23 car that he first ran. But even that, he seemed really just interested in. It's like, oh, this is something different. Just all those little tiny details to learn about. And he said it's going to, it took him half a season to win in Mercedes. So he's still on that quite steep learning curve. But again, this all seemed real to me and genuine. I didn't feel like it was somebody hoping he's found something in moving there. It's someone who thought, yeah, I found something. I think I'm back now.
Yeah, I think he's found a car that is completely different to what he's had before. You go down to, I think he was, at first test in the SF-25 at Fiorano. He closed his eyes at one point and he just knew this isn't a Mercedes engine, this is a Ferrari engine. He's found a suspension, setup that's completely different. The mechanical balance is different. The aero balance is different. The way the car approaches corners is different. Everything's different. So there is a learning process to go through. Ferrari works in different ways, but I think he's seen huge positives already. That the outside perception that Ferraris can be political. There's factions. It's difficult to get stuff done. Actually, he's found a team with a team boss, Fred Vasseur, who he's known since the junior days, who's brought a calmness and kind of a stable emotions to the team. Charles Leclerc said today that he sees in Jerome D'Ambrosio, deputy team principal, and Loic Serra, the chassis technical director, that they share Vasseur's characteristics. Very calm. You speak to one of them, it's like speaking to any of the three. So they've brought this team mentality that Leclerc feels Ferrari's in the best place it has been since he's been there. Everything, all those elements are there. And Lewis Hamilton's walked in and found all this. Plus, he knows Loic from Mercedes. He knows Jerome from Mercedes. As I mentioned before, he's known Fred Vasseur since the junior days. So I think all the question marks and things that could have gone wrong for him or elements that may not have made him comfortable aren't there. And he sees aspects, a car that isn't alien to him. Sure, it'll have characteristics and quirks and he may need to change his driving style. But all the boxes that he needs ticking have been ticked off. Now it's just a question of time and effort and hard graft to get out there and get it done.
What struck me was that, I've said it before on this podcast, he's probably going to Ferrari a bit too late in his career. But at the same time, everything you've said there, the way Hamilton's reacting, makes me think, actually, do you know what? This is actually potentially perfect timing. You wouldn't have wanted to go there in Maurizio Urbene era Ferrari, even Mattia Binotto era Ferrari, or the troubles they had before that. This has been an underachieving team. But Vasseur, that great calming presence, keeps everything in proportion, and somebody knows of old and can have trust in, I just think has made Ferrari so much better prepared to deal with this, because it's not just make a good competitive car, it's operate it well, and it's just avoid being waylaid by the politics and the nonsense that can arise in all teams, but Ferrari can be quite prone to it.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Charles Leclerc said. Lewis is arriving at the best time possible to be at Ferrari. Sure, 10 years ago he could have delivered success, but sometimes some circumstances have to align, and he is arriving at the right time for when Ferrari potentially has the golden opportunity to go for the championship. Charles Leclerc feels everything's in place, all those ingredients are there. Lewis feels those ingredients are there. You're going into 26, which is anybody's guess what's going to happen for 2026. So this isn't a bad time. And Lewis, I think he's going there pretty open-minded about, his own Formula 1 future. He was asked today, if you win that 8th championship, is that the time to hang up the helmet and call it quits and job done? He said, no. If I win the 8th, I'm probably carrying on. So this is someone excited and invigorated and sees potential success down the road, but isn't foolish enough to be sitting here today saying, yep, we're definitely going to be fighting for the World Championship this year, because at the moment it's too early to say. It's too close out there.
And I have to say, John, your judgment on this is sound, because who else better knows what it's like to move into a new environment, reinvigorated even at a grand old age. So,
well, exactly. There are some elements. When I turn up here, first day it is eye-watering. People have different ways of working. They have different ways of achieving the same results. Some stuff's better, and you think, wow, that's pretty impressive. Some stuff you think, well, actually, you should be doing this better, or this better, and this better. And you're pulling all those components together, making the thing work, knowing where the areas are that you need to focus on. I think Jerome D'Ambrosio talked a little bit about this, about the impact he's had. He said it's not necessarily guiding Lewis and helping Lewis directly, but it's knowing that, okay, Lewis has to address this problem inside Ferrari, and this is something that can help him a lot. Let's push him to these areas, the low-hanging fruit where a lot of progress can be made, rather than wasting time dealing with areas that he knows are working already pretty well. So I think everything's just happening quite quickly. And I'm sure Lewis would love another 2 months of working at Ferrari and getting more up to speed, but time's ticking. It's testing next week. Going to get on, and we'll see how long it takes Lewis to get on. He says he's now had new appreciation for Fernando Alonso winning his first race at Ferrari, Sebastian Vettel winning his second race at Ferrari. He's not foolish enough to say, yep, I'm going to do the same thing. It could take 6 races, 10 races, maybe even more, but the work's going there, and there is an excitement and a belief that everything he needs to get one step closer to that target is happening.
And that's, I think, very good news for the F1 season, because everybody's interested to see how he goes there. We've had so many questions from the Race Members Club about Lewis Hamilton in our live shows. And in fact, a good chance just to briefly talk about the Race Members Club, because we've got a 90% off your first month offer if you sign up via Patreon at the moment. Great to see how much excitement there is. How have you found it, John? That's another new thing for you, just having the Members Club here, and the amount of feedback and engagement and things we can do for them, and just how much that's evolving.
No, I think it's good, because often you can sometimes get trapped in a world in the paddock where what we think's important and hugely relevant isn't to the outside world, and there are some things that those outside would like to know more inside. And I think with the race members, these are people who understand racing and they understand Formula One, and they want to dive deeper and deeper. And I think just there's a good interaction between this world that we know in the paddock, where some things we think aren't especially special, and to those outside are amazing. Equally, there are some things that flip the other way around. And I think it's just a good way to merge these two worlds and bring them into our world and us into their world. I think it just works in a really nice way.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's really, really useful from that perspective of getting the engaged fan perspective, the enthusiast perspective, really, really valuable. And of course, members, if you're interested, get all sorts of privileges, ad-free podcasts, our bonus podcast episodes as well, not just the F1 podcast, but Bring Back V10s as well, early access to articles and videos, loads on offer. And that 90% offer is there for all membership tiers. So head to patreon.com, have a look for the race, find out more about those, or you can click on the link in the episode description. But getting back to Ferrari, John, we didn't just hear from Lewis Hamilton. We heard from, as I say, pretty much everyone else, including Charles Leclerc. And for all we've said about Lewis Hamilton, if you're Charles Leclerc, you'll be seeing all of this that Lewis Hamilton has seen about where they're coming to. And he'll be thinking, this is absolutely my chance. This is what I've been working for so long. He's going to have that real shot at the championship, surely. Yeah,
he senses the same opportunity, that the team has come together in the right way. He says the step from the SF-25, he said that, there are obvious weaknesses with that car. We know it's especially sensitive to wind, for example, as Lewis Hamilton found out at Barcelona recently on a gusty day there when it ended up in the barriers in a TPC test. And he felt sometimes in 23, in his desperation to get results, pushing things too far, and then things don't work. And it changed a bit last year. The car was much more together at the start. Charles felt in a much more happy place. Then there was that bad spell from the Spanish Grand Prix with the floor. Obviously, Canada, they lost through reliability. So it had its dips, but it's come back. And I think they've learned a lot about the car. They've learned a lot about the progress. Fred Vasseur's got everything pointing in the right direction. Lewis has arrived. Sure, he's taken the attention, and Charles has asked a lot about Lewis. And I think it must be annoying as a driver to go to a press conference and just be constantly asked about your teammate. But he says he and Lewis got similar driving styles. They're working well together, and he thinks they can feed off each other to push the team forwards. Because ultimately, it's going to be close at the front. And if they can be working together, if they can collaborate, if they can push on. Sure, there'll be days they're racing each other and emotions may get a bit heated, but this is Formula One. There's no other way you get around that if you're fighting for wins. But I sense at the moment a very unified team, a team that's feeling if it gets all its elements in place, this is a golden opportunity to go for the championship.
Yeah, and they will take that very seriously because they've not won one for a very, very long time. Came close last year, but yeah, that could be a huge story for the season, how Leclerc and Hamilton get on. But obviously we don't know how good the car is yet, but it's interesting hearing from people like Loic Serra, the chassis technical director, about the approach they've taken, why they've gone, not radical, but it's quite visually obvious where they've made changes. The front suspension, of course, going to pull rod is the big one. We've talked about that a bit in the past. But he was asked about why you take, in fact, you asked about that, why take that bigger step for the last year of a rule cycle. And he just said, well, we were running out of room to develop with the old car. So we had to do something like this in order to extract more pace out of it. So that seems sensible. It doesn't feel like a hit and hope, does it? It's, right, actually, we really understand this now, particularly after the trouble they had last season with the upgrade. And they've been able to make what should be sound decisions to create more performance opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these decisions were made before Loic joined. He only arrived in October. So a lot of the major architectural elements were in place before then. But I think it's a concept he agrees with, and also, is designed to give it the headroom it needs to progress. It was quite interesting that both Fred Vasseur and Loic, in our media sessions today, talked about the difference between them, Ferrari and McLaren being 0.03 seconds, basically, which I think is an average race pace distance over the entire season, which is almost nothing. So they know the tiny marginal gains now that are making differences. So, and while it is a big step, we see the suspension, we see lots of different elements are different. Loic is quite interested. No, it's just evolution. It's just evolution to give us more space, and that more space will allow more aerodynamic freedom, and more aerodynamic freedom, in theory, should be more downforce, better balance, increased performance, more lap time, and a tiny bit more lap time than your rivals. With the way things are at Formula One, could be the difference between P2 and P1.
Exactly, and for all of the enthusiasm that we're probably imparting about Ferrari here, it's not that we think they're going to be far and away the strongest car, but everything points at the moment, including the trend last year, to them being there with McLaren. Those are the two teams that have the fewest question marks over them based on what we saw last year. Red Bull, every chance they'll be up there. Mercedes, you're sort of hoping they'll be in there as well. So, yeah, really, really encouraging in that regard. But I think the battle-hardenedness of Ferrari that they've developed over the past few years, and the good sense of the Vasseur era is going to help, because they've become far less chaotic at times. The strategy has generally been good. Everybody gets strategy a bit wrong sometimes, but we're not seeing some of the more madcap things that were happening. It just feels assured. And I feel that regardless of whether they start the season with a 1-2 or have a disaster in Australia, Fred Vasseur will just be there saying, no, follow the process, we've got to do this, got to do that. Let's not over-celebrate or over-catastrophise. Let's just do what we do. And I think that's such a valuable strength.
Yeah, I think it's the calmness. But equally, I do think, and Charles mentioned this earlier, that he says that the key is hitting the ground running at the start of the season. Because I think with this year, with 2026 on the horizon, the teams don't want to be developing post-summer break. So they need to get everything done before the season. The dream scenario, of course, is that you rock up in Melbourne, you're a second clear of the opposition, and you can bring one upgrade for the start of the European season, shut the development down, and you're away and the championship's won. But that's not going to happen. But I think what you do need to do is you need to keep delivering those points at the start of the season, and just to maintain your competitiveness for when all of the teams turn the taps off, because at some point they are all going to have to switch to 26. That will most likely freeze performance, and then it'll be about optimizing setups on weekends and tyre strategies, extracting pace in qualifying, all those elements on a race weekend. But things will largely be set in stone by that stage. So you don't want to have a poor start to the season and be playing catch up, like McLaren was last year. You don't want to wobble like Ferrari had from Spain, where it lost ground over 4 or 5 races. So it needs to be there. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be in that mix. And then I think it has the opportunity to ensure that it is consistently strong. And that's what will be the foundations of the championship.
And of course, for all the positivity, and I don't think Ferrari are overly arrogant or overly confident by any stretch of the imagination, but they've just got an assuredness about them. But if things do start badly and they have 5 or 6 difficult races and they're not really getting anywhere, and Hamilton and Leclerc are finishing 7th, 5th, 8th, then that can be quite a negative swing, can't it? So that's absolutely possible at this stage. Just because the trend's good, just because the signs are positive, doesn't mean anything's guaranteed. But I would say I'm probably more convinced by Ferrari than at any time in the past decade, probably a bit more.
Yeah, I think it's just the elements of coming into place, the lessons of last year. And I think if you dug into last year, I think you could argue that if that Spain upgrade had worked and they hadn't had the engine problems in Canada, then the season would have been completely different and they could have won maybe both championships. Because I think they were super strong at the beginning, they were super strong at the end. They had that middle phase where they lost an awful lot of points. So you could argue the team was already there, it just needed to optimise everything. And I think what it's done over this winter is done that, and as Lewis says, it's twiddled the right kind of levers to get everything in place. And it just needs to be in a position that it's ready to be fighting for the championship. Because nothing's won or lost yet. Nothing will be won or lost in Australia. But you need to make sure that when this season starts, you are fighting at the front. You have a car that can win the championship. Then you get that confirmation. Then it's heads down and get on with it.
Absolutely. The signs are good now, but it doesn't count for a great deal. But for the time being, things looking pretty good at Ferrari. And I think we've got no doubt about Lewis Hamilton being very, very happy with the decision he's made to go there.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Noah Chestnut from The Athletic. If you're into games and sports, pay attention. I'm going to give you 4 sports terms. You tell me the common thread. Ready? Axle, loop, Lutz, Salchow. That's axle, loop, Lutz, Salchow. This one's like medium hard. The answer is figure skating jumps. Now, what if I gave you 16 different terms and you figure out how they come together into 4 different groups? If you're up for the challenge, you'll want to check out Connections Sports Edition. It's a new daily game for sports fans. There'll be some that are going to stump you, some that make you laugh, and some that remind you when you were a kid watching sports for the first time. Connections Sports Edition. To play today's puzzle, go to theathletic.com/connections.
Well, let's get technical now as I'm joined by the legend that is Gary Anderson. Welcome, Gary. You've been poring over what we've seen of the Ferrari in the launch images and from Fiorano. They've called it 99% new. So does the step they've taken visually satisfy so hard a taskmaster as yourself?
Well, the big problem is really it's 4 years now into these regulations. So, you're not exactly expecting somebody to reinvent the wheel, I suppose. So it's all about the detail and moving things around, giving yourself more opportunity for development. As you've learned over the last few years, things can be in the way to allow you to exploit the aerodynamic surfaces a bit further. I think that's what Ferrari are probably saying. It's a 99% new car. I think that's an exaggeration, obviously, because there's plenty of nuts and bolts in there that won't be new. But they have done quite a reasonable job. I'm not disappointed in what I saw. I think it's a lot of detail they've gone into. The front suspension, obviously, they've gone from a push rod to a pull rod. Their wording on that is that it gives them more opportunity for the future. There would need to be more commitment to it than that, I think. It's one of these sort of things where it's not an easy task to package all that front suspension stuff in the bottom of the chassis, and it's not easy to maintain it and change the setup on it either. It's not very easy to get to. So you need to have a fair amount of commitment to go on that route. So I would imagine there's more to it than meets the eye there. One of my biggest sort of things is you can take this bunch of stuff that's normally at the top of the chassis, and you put it at the bottom of the chassis, and that will lower the centre of gravity of the whole car, but mainly at the front. And the centre of gravity, there's an axis where it goes through the front and rear axle. Obviously, all meets up in the middle somewhere and gives you the centre of gravity height, but it's not just a horizontal line. It's an angle line. The front is higher than the back, just because of what you see. The chassis is higher, the driver's higher, the engine itself is very low, the gearbox is very low, so the back of the car, the CFG, is quite low, the front of the car, the CFG, is quite high. As I say, that all meets up in the middle somewhere. It gives you the roll moment on the car, but if the roll moment on the front axle is much different to the roll moment on the rear axle, then your suspension characteristics need to be different. Otherwise, the car, when it starts to load up laterally, the car will perhaps jack up at the front and perhaps actually jack downwards at the rear. If that's what you want, that's fine, but you need to make sure you know about it. And sometimes the only way to do that is to, move the centre of gravity axis to try to get the loads differently on the front and rear axle. So there's more to it than just saying I will do it because it'll open up opportunities for the future. I think you have to commit to some of these sort of things for good enough reasons to say it's aerodynamically at this point in time maybe not any better, but mechanically it should be better, and aerodynamically we will find solutions further down the road for it. So yeah, I'm not disappointed in the Ferrari. I have been for quite a few years now and again, said my bit about it to some people's distaste, but at the end of the day, you can only talk about what you see, what you feel, what you know. And I think Ferrari, it's a neat and tidy job. Looks like the wheelbase is a little bit longer, but it's not too much longer. It's just that little bit, which again allows them a little bit more area to control the front wheel wake. And it also moves the centre of gravity a little bit. You move the front wheels forward, the car's got a longer wheelbase, so you can drop things down that little bit more. So maybe they have pursued a lot of small details, but time will tell, and the stopwatch never lies.
We've heard from Loic Serra, the technical director chassis, today, and he's talked about, when asked about the repackaging of the suspension and things like the fact the wheelbase has been slightly extended, like they've pushed the front axle a bit further forward, to be precise. Nothing massive, but it's all about creating space and aerodynamic opportunity. And obviously, when you slightly shift the front axle forward, it's not by meters, is it? It's quite a small thing.
Yep.
But how much can you get from just those small sorts of changes, those tiny little opportunities? How much can be exploited aerodynamically out of that if you get it right?
Well, yeah, it's a fair amount. We used to always look at 50 millimeters, 5 centimeters increments of potential, I suppose you might call it. Even then, that's quite a lot. It was just the fact that to increase the wheelbase by 2 centimeters, 20 millimeters, it's not enough to get significant feeling into the driver that you've done something. So you have to give yourself a number somewhere in space that says, let's look at doing this, and you have to see how you can package things a bit different. And all this the stuff for the front suspension, obviously mounted in, around and below the driver's heels in there, is takes up some space. And that may be one of the reasons, because before, obviously, it's mounted at the top of the chassis. It can be above the driver's feet because the chassis is tall enough to accept that. So there is packaging issues that may mean you want to lengthen the wheelbase, but it's not bad. We had quite a lot of conversation with Lewis Hamilton in years gone by about the wheelbase and how he didn't feel the rear of the car properly because he was too near the front axle. So that little bit will move the driver further rearward as such relative to the front axle, so he might be able to feel the rear axle a little bit earlier. I mean, Lewis is one of their drivers now, so they may also have reacted to that a little bit, but I would imagine it's for more than just the driver feel. Is a packaging issue that they needed to move the front wheels forward that little bit, and there is aerodynamic issues with it. So, issues. I say there's aerodynamic potential with it, so it's not wrong to do.
And obviously from the car, there's some quite nice shaping in the side pod, the radiator inlet, etc. That's probably the first thing that your eye gets drawn to when you see those. So how significant is that? Are you impressed by how much detail they've gone into there, how much they've pushed it?
Yeah, aesthetically, it's more pleasing than last year's car, I suppose. And what you could say with last year's car, it was sort of adapted as the season went on to follow the Red Bull had set with this, letterbox radiator intake with the top surface carrying on like a peak of a cap. But yeah, I think it's a tidied up version of last year's car in a lot of areas, which is important. I was a little bit surprised that the radiator inlets have got bigger because it's one of those sort of things with the radiators and the cooling. I keep saying you can't push the airflow through the radiator. What you have to do is end up with a positive pressure in front of the radiator and a negative pressure behind the radiator. So you get a pressure differential across the core of the radiator, and that drags the airflow through there. And then, you modify your cooling, the exit cooling really, to increase the cooling or decrease the cooling. The fact that the front of the side pod is quite critical because of all the side impact structures. So it's not something that overnight you can change the shape of the radiator inlet. So you want to give yourself a decent enough radiator inlet that your variation on exits will be effective. Maybe they're actually sort of planning or thinking that this year will be a bit more a bit closer than it has been in the past, because obviously we've seen in the years gone by that a few races where people couldn't use the full performance because it just ended up that they were stuck in traffic and they had to sort of back off a little bit, turn the engine down, or lift off a bit early at the end of the straights because of cooling. So maybe they put themselves in a better window for trying to make sure that they could cool in all sorts of occasions. Just be having a little bit bigger radiator intake, and then obviously they can change the exit, as I say, to optimise the cooling a little bit better. Maybe they were a bit close to the mark last year, so they needed to improve the cooling. The problem is that if you normally, with a step in cooling, you end up with a situation where that does hurt the efficiency of the whole car, because cooling doesn't come for nothing. So it's a balancing act, it's about making the right compromises. But in the race, you need to use the car fully, I suppose is the best way to put it. And that's important because next year, as I say, this year, I think it will be a competitive season.
Do you think, harness to that, we'd have seen, if we could see under the bodywork, hopefully we will be able to later in the season, do you think we'd have seen much changing and repackaging of things? Because obviously there's the talk about last year's car. They said they were kind of running out of development potential in it, so they wanted to do lots of just little restructuring here and there in the car just to create that shape. So do you think we'd see a little bit of that, and that's also driven some of the shape change because of the characteristics you require?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the cooling, the radiator cores for the various different things having moved maybe down to the side pods, and that's why they got a bigger radiator intake in the side pod as such. Because having it all mounted up high on top of the engine there, it's a great thing, except for it's very high. Again, I keep on harping on about the centre of gravity. I've never found a time in my life where lowering the centre of gravity of a racing car hasn't been beneficial. So, it's one of these sort of things where you push your hardest to lower the centre of gravity. And, even the regulations for the engine, because it was getting stupid, has a minimum centre of gravity out for the engine. So it's one of these things where you push as much as possible. And where you've got those mechanical components in the side pods, that's where you need the cooling ducts to be. So maybe changes in that area. the width of the fuel tank, the maximum width of the structure where the fuel tank goes is set, but not the minimum width. So, if you want to give it a little squeeze at the bottom, get the floor a little bit different shape, profile at the bottom, so be it. So all of those things are things that you learn as the year goes past, and where your development has been restricted. You couldn't go any further on this. You were getting advantages of it in the wind tunnel, and you got to a dead end where you couldn't go any further. So that's what you do during the build of a new car. You sort of open up those areas again to give you that little bit more opportunity. But it's never black and white. It's never the right thing. You just have to go and prove it.
And looking a bit higher up on the side pod, we've seen a hint of a return of what we saw from Ferrari a few years ago, didn't we, with that sort of scalloped side pod surface. They've obviously brought a little bit of that back as part of what seems to be a fairly aggressive change to the whole side pod and undercut area.
Yeah, it always looks aggressive. The thing is that we sort of called it a gully back in the Ferrari 2022 car. It was sort of a bathtub. The regulations dictate that there's a minimum radius you're allowed on the bodywork, and that's why it looks like a rolled top bathtub down the edge of the bodywork, because you can't really make it into like a fin. Yeah, it's not allowed. So there's that minimum radius you've got to comply with, and that's obviously why it looks like what it does. You would probably have a lesser width body profile there if you could, but you can't. And I think you just wanted to get this gully started, get the body, let the top surface flow have somewhere down the back of the car to get through, rather than allowing it to come in through the coke bottle, which is a little bit difficult with the underfloor edge to stop the underfloor edge leaking. If you have too much flow through the coke bottle, you're trying to bring it down that top surface into the middle of the car to help the diffuser and the beam wing to work better, especially at low ride heights. So it's one of those sort of things. Again, it's a compromise of what you want to do with the airflow structure, what the regulations allow you to do as far as the physical bodywork profiles are concerned, and that's where they've ended up at. I don't think it looks bad. It's one of those sort of areas where it's nice to see something a little bit different, and to see who's got it right. As I say, most teams have what we call the sort of gully. It starts halfway along the top of the side pod and ends up down at the back, very narrow, fairly narrow, and very deep. I think Aston Martin were really very, very steep incline on it. You've got to be careful with that, because obviously airflow separation problems, if you try to work the flow too hard, make it change direction too much, you can get a lot of airflow separation problems. So you need to be careful you don't instigate any of those. But the Ferrari, to me, it's a good compromise of trying to achieve what they're trying to do, get airflow into the middle of the car, but not too dramatically.
And looking at the back of the car, are you surprised to see that Ferrari still almost stands alone in having a pull rod configuration, with the push rod being the popular one? Or do you think they were kind of locked into that, in that it was quite a big project to change both ends in that regard for this year?
Yes, it is a big project. I believe that going to a push rod rear suspension would be an easier task than going to the pull rod front suspension, as far as design's concerned. But again, I can see through the whole car a sort of fad of centre of gravity height. And obviously, if you take some of the stuff that's in the back of the car low down and raise it up, you will raise the centre of gravity. Now, again, this centre of gravity axis that I keep talking about, that will sort of make that flatter. So the front and rear axles wouldn't have such different characteristics whenever they're laterally loaded up. But again, having the suspension itself all down in the bottom of the gearbox, just behind the engine, means that you really can't get the profile of the gearbox down width-wise as quickly as you'd probably like to allow the diffuser to come in as quickly as you'd probably like to. So again, it's a bit of a compromise. Everybody will look at it and say, well, for all this work of changing the suspension to a push rod, we're going to gain 10 millimeters of width in that area. Is that beneficial? And it's it's making your decisions as to what you can achieve. They probably thought there was other areas that were bigger fish to fry than that one. So stuck with what they know, and it's important. You don't want to just sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to make sure you keep the good points of what you got. And maybe they felt the rear suspension was was quite a good solution the way they operated. Again, the stopwatch will tell us.
And overall, I'm sensing that basically your reaction to the Ferrari is broadly a thumbs up, so quite positive. And just to ask an unfair question, you've seen the McLaren, you've seen this. We're both teams are expected to be right up at the front as they were for the Constructors' Championship last year. Is there one that you particularly like the look of over and above the other? Bearing in mind we're probably trying to get you to detect a lap time difference. It'll be about 1/10 of a second on a good day.
Well, the one thing I would say is that McLaren have I suppose you could say, taken risks, in my opinion, with the way with how far they've exploited the suspension geometry, the longitudinal suspension geometry, in other words, braking and accelerating, to try to control the aero platform of the car. And my biggest worry with that is, of my experience, it's one of these things that is so difficult to simulate. It's about driver feel, how the driver is affected by it all. So I think on the track, if McLaren don't have problems, then I think McLaren have taken bigger steps than Ferrari. That said, if McLaren do have problems, then Ferrari have played safe, I suppose you might call it. I think they'll still be together, battling quite closely, and that's what I want to see. I want to see Red Bull join the club, Mercedes join the club, perhaps even Alpine join the club. Because we want a competitive season. At the end of these rules, we're going to be it's going to be a separation of the grid for 2026 for sure, because of the rule change for then, because it's quite big. So this year is the fourth year of ground effect rules as we know them, and I'd love to see a season where we have no idea who's going to win the championship until the last race or the last couple of races. So hopefully, everybody will have a bit of step forward in some degree or another. There has to be a plateau where you have to end up, you can't get any more from it. Are we near that plateau? It doesn't really matter. You're only as good as the team that does the best. That's all you can do. It's all relative. So let's see what 2025 brings us.
Absolutely. I think we're all hoping for a good close season. We should certainly get it. Right, well, Gary, it wasn't only the Ferrari that we've seen. We also had images released by Alpine and Sauber. Now, Alpine, I don't know about you, but I found their selection fairly disappointing, and I'm not sure there's a great deal to discern from the 5 images that they produced. But has anything caught your eye at all on the Alpine, or do you think we'll just ignore that for now and then talk about it when we see the actual car in a week or so's time?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have to ignore it. It was, arty shots, I suppose you might call it. They are the team that I suppose you could say, with their end of season performance at the end of 2024. They could join the big club. I would hope that there's a good chance they could join the big club. I mean, Briatore, whether you like him or not, he's not there for fun. He's there because he wants success, and he doesn't mind how he goes about getting that, as we've known in the past. He's played a pretty strong card game whenever it comes to making decisions about just success for his own team. And Pierre Gasly is not a hardened professional driver. He's had the experience. He's fairly well fitted into Formula One. He's fast for sure, but he doesn't seem to now have that fragility that he had a few years ago. So I think they're the team that I'd like to see do a good job. We'll have to wait and see the car in more detail, because, as I say, the shots that we've seen are just artistically driven as opposed to technically driven. So I'm sure it's going to be better to see the real car and get some of the real sort of emphasis on some of the changes that they've done. But I think they're a team on the up. I think they've restructured themselves pretty well. They were in the doldrums for 2 or 3 years with their management. I think now they've got a pretty decent focus on where they're trying to get to in the future.
The car we probably did see a little bit more from was the Sauber C45. They released a lot more images, still largely renders, sort of studio-style renders almost, but there was at least more to go on from there. So you've probably been able to draw a little bit more of a conclusion on what we've seen from Sauber.
Yeah, I think for Sauber, my big thing is that this is the last year of being theoretically Sauber, a little, private team stuck in the middle of Switzerland, doing the best job they can. They are going to become an Audi Works team next year. And I think for that to sort of have any momentum, they need to prove this year that the group of people they have, the technical group of people they have, and their workmanship, their functionality of the company is strong enough to be called an Audi Works team. Because Audi won't be there for the fun of it. They'll want to get success. they've been very successful in sports cars and DTM and anything they got involved in. So they're not coming into Formula One just for the sake of Formula One. They're not coming in like Alfa Romeo did as a sticker on the side of the car. They're going to be part of it. So Sauber need to prove themselves this year that they have a group that can react to a given situation. Nico Hülkenberg coming across from Haas, is a good candidate. We know that Nico's not slow. He's been a pretty unlucky driver and has never been able to stand on the podium yet. Maybe that'll change. But the car, I've been going through it as best I can. Again, as you said, there's not that many good shots. It's green and black car with a black background, which is always pretty difficult to see. But there's a few things in it that I'm not quite sure about. One of them is the simple thing of the diffuser. Again, they are renders, so I don't know what's right and what's wrong. But they haven't used all the area of the exit area of the diffuser that you're allowed in the regulations, and that's a bit of a strange thing because these ground effect cars, there's so much potential downforce in the underfloor, and the diffuser is all part of that underfloor. So to give up some of that percentage, and if I was just put a figure on it, you're probably talking 5%, maybe a bit more of the volume that you could use. That's relative to the downforce that you're giving up because you're not using that volume. So I question that, Matt, personally. There's a bit of a hint in the underneath of the bodywork below the radiator inlet where they've got this, again, it's like the Ferrari side pod top section that they've got. There's a bit of a section underneath the radiator intake which has got that bathtub roll top edge as well, which is a bit strange because that's an area where I believe you need the flow to be as unrestricted as possible, because that's the area where you're that flow through between the wheel and the chassis and through that undercut area is really dictating the performance of the front wing. It's also working the edges of the floor. So that flow is critically important to quite a lot of stuff. As I say, the front wing performance and how the floor edge works. So I don't see the reason of putting that hump in there to contain that flow. But again, stopwatch will tell us it's got the pull rod front suspension. It's all good. Pull rod rear suspension as well. There's nothing wrong with it, but I think somewhere along the line they've perhaps got the wrong, I would say, philosophy on how to get the aerodynamic package to work as one. I don't think they build a bad car. It's just if you haven't got the right philosophy of what you're setting your people to do, then it's very easy to get to a very good car for what your philosophy is, but a very poor car relative to what the philosophy could be. And I think Sauber are caught in there in the middle somewhere. I'm not quite sure how to explain it, but I don't think their objectives are as near to the mark for a ground effect car as they could be.
Yeah, and I guess the hope is that little step they took at the end of last year that at least allowed them to grab a face-saving points finish in Qatar with Joe will transfer into this car. But yeah, it's not one of those ones you look at and think, wow, there's loads going on here. Obviously, we've got the usual caveat that when the car runs in public, we might see a lot more detail and we can revisit the car, but I wouldn't be holding my breath for that. I guess that's probably the status Sauber's at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's true, but of all the teams, there's none of them want to show their dirty washing in public, so they will be keeping a few things under the counter that perhaps they'll show up in Bahrain with, but it'll probably be late in the day in Bahrain before they really put on their trick gizmo. The big problem really is with the cost cap nowadays. You can't do too much of that. You can do a bit of that, but you can't do too much of it. So we'll see. Whatever appears in Bahrain will obviously compare to what we've theoretically been given as what their new car looks like. So yeah, we'll do that to all the teams though. It's not just a Sauber Alpine sort of situation. It's all the teams will have some little secret weapon.
Yeah, and we will be there on the ground in Bahrain, bringing you all the details of that. Very much looking forward to testing starting. Thanks very much, as always, Gary, for your insight on these cars. If you'd like more from Gary, head to therace.com. Don't forget the hyphen. It's analysis of the Ferraris up. By the time you listen to this, his Sauber analysis should be potentially out there and ready to read. It's certainly very much in the works, and we'll keep doing that with every new car as we see enough of them from what they've released. And thanks, of course, as well to Jon Noble for his contribution earlier. Well, the next time we know we're going to see a new car will be Aston Martin on Sunday, so we'll have a chat about that then. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of F1 launches.
The Athletic.